Oh god. Of course.
Welcome back, everyone. For this month, we'll be checking out Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. This action and strategy role-playing sandbox game was first released into early access in March of 2020, but officially got released in October of 2022 for the PC, PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox One, and Series X and S. Published and developed by Tailworlds Entertainment. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty simple, but as you explore more of the game's systems, you'll find it to be a bit more complex. I honestly haven't figured out all of the systems yet. Thankfully, there's YouTubers like Flessin19 and Strat Gaming who have tons of videos to explain how all of these systems work and what you need to do. The game has an addicting nature to it. Constantly, I wanted to keep playing and do one last thing before going to bed, but end up playing for another 2 or 3 hours. It is great for watching videos or movies on a second monitor while playing. So if you are into sandbox games where you get to create your own character and decide on your own choices that impact the world, then definitely check out this game. As usual, we're going to go through the story. Well, it's the story of my playthrough, while I try my best to narrate my character, Shadoe, and his journey through this world. I'll also talk about what I liked and disliked, and any funny or awkward moments that happened to me during my playthrough. Let's go wait for town loyalty to rise. I'm serious, this is part of the game. First, some quick history. Tailworlds is actually a Turkish development studio founded in 2005. Their first game was Mount & Blade in 2008 and was published by Paradox Games. You know, that studio that loves to push out so much DLC in all of its games. Luckily, Mount & Blade didn't receive that same treatment. Looking back, the game may not have looked that great, but I did enjoy the unique combat system and gameplay of going to villages, recruiting volunteers to your party, do quests for lords or merchants, eventually creating an army and taking castles or towns. You could join a faction or create your own. The game is very simple compared to the later games, but still a fun experience. The next game was Mount & Blade Warband, released in 2010. This added a new map, added a new faction, and lots of quality of life improvements. Overall, it's more of an expansion pack than a brand new game, but most people would argue this is the best one out of the series. There were tons of mods for this game, like Game of Thrones or Star Wars. But there was one that got a lot of attention, Viking Conquest. In 2015, it got a reforged edition. Then just a year later, in 2011, came Mount & Blade with Fire and Sword. I didn't play this game after hearing mostly negative reviews. Now we get to Bannerlord, where in September of 2012, Tailworlds announced they were working on Mount & Blade 2. However, it wasn't until 4 years later, in March of 2016, they finally showed off some gameplay. Then a year later, in 2017, they showed some more gameplay and started their developer diaries. Another year goes by, and in 2018, they did have a demo at Gamescom. And another year passes. In 2019, they mentioned a closed beta, but that never happened. Instead, they announced the game was getting a release into early access in 2020. Finally, after a total of 8 years in development, players finally got to play Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. And it was an alright game. Yes, it was buggy, and worst of all, every time there was a new patch, I had to start a new character because the old saves wouldn't work on the new patch. So I played the game on and off, but never got to enjoy the later parts of the game. After it got officially released this past October, I decided to finally give it my full attention. I did have some technical issues like crashes, but that might have been problems with my brand new computer I built. Once I got that resolved, the game ran great and the crashes stopped. However, sometimes there was the occasional strange glitch. At least I could finally start enjoying and building a character in this game. Comparing it to the very first Mount & Blade, they knew what players enjoyed and made sure to expand on every part of that. And I would say they succeeded, especially after 2 years of development in early access. Let's talk about gameplay. After you create your character and decide his starting skills, you start in a tutorial area to teach you the basic controls and the basics of combat. WASD to move your character in battle, and to move the camera when on the world map. When fighting in combat, depending on where your camera was moving last, will determine which direction your weapon will swing. You have left or right. Up is an overhead swing, while down is a thrust. Right clicking is for blocking, and it works the same. If you see an enemy is attacking to your left, then move your camera to the left and hold the right mouse button to block attacks on your left. There are settings to change and make this easier where you don't have to move your camera to block in that direction. If you have a shield, then it will block attacks in any direction. Riding horses can help you build up speed, which increases your damage if you hit an enemy at top speed. If you had to break it down, the game basically involves you running from one village, castle, or town to either recruit, trade items, or talk to someone, then run to another place and do the same thing. Sometimes along the way you might run into an enemy party or bandits that you want to fight, or they want to fight you. You can choose to run away, but sacrificing some troops and supplies, simulate the battle, or fight it personally. I know I may have just made the game sound very simple and straightforward, but it's far from that. This playthrough was about 50 hours long, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Well, maybe not the sitting and waiting parts. That's probably what inflated this number. Maybe I need to break the game down like this. There's an early, mid, and late stages to the game. In the early game, you'll be doing one of several things. The first thing I think any person should do is save up enough money for a caravan. It's easy passive income, so you'll be traveling the world gathering recruits to fight bandits, then get to a town and see if there's a tournament to compete in. You will get some gold, dinars, along with a prize like a weapon, armor, or a horse. Keep the prize if it's an upgrade, or sell it for some good amount of dinars. Then go to the market and buy something cheap, then head to a different town and hopefully sell it for more to make a profit. Or do what I did and buy all the cows, sheep, and pigs, then slaughter them and sell their meat and hides for easy profit. Make sure not to keep selling at the same town because supply and demand is a thing in this game and prices will change. Killing bandits and winning tournaments earns you renown, which will increase your clan tier, so you can have a bigger party size and unlock the ability to join a faction as a mercenary. By this point, you'll be in the mid stage. You should have enough money coming in and joining a faction as a mercenary to help them fight in their war. You'll make so much money if you do a good job defeating their enemies. You may also look to start a family, which are free companions to help you fight in battle, or become caravans for more money, or prepare them for becoming governors in the late game. However, this is a system you'll need to enable with the birth and death option. Yes, your character can die in many ways, like in battle or old age, which means you take control of someone else in your family and level up their character. As a new player, I recommend turning this off. You'll have a much easier time learning the game without the worry of your character getting killed. I, however, had this turned off, so my two siblings never aged, and despite getting a wife, couldn't have children. I look forward to trying this system out whenever I decide to revisit this game. You may look to get into smithing to craft the best weapons in the game. I won't lie, it's very tedious. And worst of all, you can only work on it for a bit before your character gets too tired, which makes sense, but then you just hit a button to make your character wait a bit until he's rested and do it all over again. There's videos to watch and learn how to grind this out quickly. I was able to make the best two-handed swords for my character and his companions. Then I sold a bunch of them to make a ton of money and buy some of the best armor in the game. This led me to fighting more and bigger battles to earn more renown. Hopefully at this point you've unlocked Clan Tier 3, which means you can decide to join a kingdom or start your own. It's not easy to create your own kingdom, plus you need to be very rich. You'll most likely get declared war on right away. So it's best to wait until you've maxed out and have a big army and is made up of high tier troops. That's right, each soldier you recruit levels up. It costs you money up front to level them and their wages go up. Soldiers are broken up into footmen, archers, cavalry, and cavalry archers. Each faction has their own look and names for their soldiers, but I stayed with only recruiting Imperials from the villages. You can also recruit from towns, for the Empire. Once you've decided to join a faction, I would say you're now into the late game. Here you might be given a castle, or if you're lucky, a town. Villages you can't do much about, but castles and towns you can choose to upgrade them. Now there's a lot to talk about to improving castles and towns. Again, Strat and Flesson have detailed videos on this. But just know, you need to keep loyalty up, otherwise it will rebel and you'll lose it to a new rebel faction. So long as you stay in the city, it will never rebel. Putting it into festival and games will raise its loyalty. This is where you'll be sitting and waiting for it to go up before you can start building structures. Once you get loyalty under control and build all the structures, you will get a lot of income from castles and towns, so long as you protect your villages from bandits or enemy parties. Again, check out other videos for more details. The other part of the late game is when your faction goes to war. Every time a lord is defeated, they might escape to gather another army and try again, or get taken prisoner. You can make some great money selling them for ransom at a town's tavern, or just keep them as a prisoner so they won't go gather another army and fight you again. There is another option: executing them. This permanently removes them from the game, but everyone will hate you for doing this, and so it becomes hard to persuade people to do what you want. If you eliminate all the lords in a faction, then the faction is no more. I was able to do this to 3 factions and almost finished off 2 more, but either due to a bug or glitch, I wasn't able to get them because they were already prisoners, but they weren't showing up, and when I went to try and trade for them, they won't show up in the trade menu. One last thing to talk about is sieges. At first I could never understand them. When you siege a town or castle, it first takes some time to get your siege camp built. This gives the defenders time to build ballistas or catapults first. Then the attackers can start building a ram and siege towers safely. But if they build ballistas, catapults, or trebuchets, that's when the siege equipment start fighting. Every time I built something, it got destroyed right away. Turns out, right after it finishes building, you need to click on it and put it in reserve, then wait for the rest to get built, then place them all at once. Now the attackers can take down the defender's siege equipment and take down their walls. This does play into simulating battle. I've noticed if the walls are down and no siege equipment is built, then I lose far fewer soldiers. There is other stuff I could talk about, like workshops, but I didn't understand how they work and they barely make any money for me. There are many quests to do, but they never really seemed worth the time, except for a few in the early game. There's a whole politics system that revolves around influence, but I rarely touched it. Overall, I still enjoyed this gameplay loop and recommend you guys check it out. Heck, instead of trying to become a king or emperor of your own faction, you could just be a simple merchant and play it like it's Merchant Simulator. Our story begins with a man named Shadoe. He and his brother Shanas have been tracking kidnappers that took their younger brother, Shasas, and sister Shalia. But Shanas knew even if they caught up to them, how are they going to rescue them? Shadoe told his brother he will raise a small force to help them. Shadoe went from village to village, recruiting what villagers he could, and bought farm animals. He would slaughter them and sell their hide and meat at the nearest town for a profit. He would even compete in the local tournament. It was tough because Shadoe wasn't a good fighter. He was still learning the basics of combat. He would use all of his strength and motivation to win. With each victory, he could feel he was getting closer to rescuing his siblings. He also knew that Imperial recruits wouldn't be good soldiers for kidnappers. So if Shadoe came across some bandits, he would attack them. Not only for improving his soldiers' skills, but ridding this land of bandits was always a good thing. Even though they will never go away, they still have some useful loot to sell and can sell off the prisoners. His next goal was to raise enough money and start his first caravan. Someone he could trust and go trade goods from town to town and make Shadoe easy passive income. It sure did cost a lot, 15,000 dinars, but he knew it was worth the investment. Many more days passed. He continued winning tournament after tournament, eliminating bandits, buying and selling goods for profit, until Shadoe went to the town of Myzia and happened to run into a man named Radagos, who claims to have been looking for him. This was the man that killed Shadoe's parents and kidnapped Shasas and Shalia. He says he was betrayed by his partner Galtur. He was lucky to escape and decided to come find Shadoe and ask for his help in getting revenge. They set out and waited for nightfall to raid the camp. Shadoe starts with his bow and takes out some of the bandits before they can raise the alarm. Some of the bandits have nothing but rocks to throw. The rage inside Shadoe is too much, and so he pulls out his two-handed axe and begins taking out bandits that get in his way. Eventually, the leader, Galtur, shows his face. Shadoe charges right at him and shows no mercy. Radagos does get the final blow to kill Galtur. Shanas shows up and is happy to see the family back together. He's going to take them to the nearest town for safety. Then Shadoe speaks with Radagos. He says he is done with slaving and will most likely work as a mercenary. Shadoe has the opportunity to get his revenge, but decides to honor the deal and let him go. Now Shadoe must find a new purpose in life. After exploring much of the land of Calradia, Shadoe decided to pick up blacksmithing. He wasn't very good at it, but with the help of Shanas and their new companion Zlatka, they were able to make some of the finest two-handed weapons. This helped out a great deal with their income. They were able to afford some good armor now. Gathering the materials from across the land took up most of their time, but it was necessary. He looked for daggers like Pugio, or tribesmen throwing knives, because they could be smelted down and give the most materials. After many months of smelting, forging, and refining, they finally had the money to buy some of the best armor in Calradia for Shadoe, Shanas, and Zlatka. They also kept the best two-handed swords for themselves. The blade was so long it would sometimes not even be attached to the hilt. It felt like waving a sharp spear around. Enemies could not touch them before getting hit by their two-handed monster of a sword. With the best armor and two-handed weapons, Shadoe and his party joined the Empire, specifically the Western Empire. Emperor Gyarios, a strong leader who believes war is the only way to unite the Empire and the world. To start, Shadoe assisted in the war to the south against the Aserai. He patrolled around the desert looking for easy enemy parties roaming around. After defeating several of them, he returned to Ortesia and sold off the prisoners and loot he collected. As his army was leaving, they could see a massive Aserai army approaching the town. At first, the army tried going after small parties around the town. Shadoe did his best to maneuver around and attack small Aserai parties. Later on, one of the big armies tried raiding the village of Arpotis, but finally reinforcements arrived and together the Empire eradicated the army. However, this was just a third of the real army. The Aserai still had an even bigger army that was in the process of sieging Ortesia. The Empire continued to wait until more reinforcements arrived, while Shadoe took out another party nearby. While the siege was going on, the Aserai army had lost a significant amount of troops, which gave enough confidence for the Empire to move in and end the siege. With over 1,000 Aserai troops dead, it was time to push their advantage. The army immediately set out to retake Garantor Castle. Then as the army pushed towards the desert, another army appeared. About evenly matched, but with Shadoe arriving, the advantage turned to the Empire. It was a massive and intense battle. Shadoe took many arrows, but were triumphant. However, the battle took many lives, even for the Empire. Yet another army came out of nowhere from the desert and wiped out what's left of the Imperials. Shadoe took his army and fled. This new Aserai army began its siege on the castle, while Shadoe did his best to ambush small parties that tried to join the main force. Even though the castle was taken, the Empire did arrive with more reinforcements and quickly took the castle back. With such a major defeat for the Aserai, it had to be their last major army, because shortly after, a messenger arrived with a peace offer. They offered over 3,000 dinars per day, and everyone including Emperor Gyarios agreed to the terms. The first war may be over, but many more were to come. Shadoe's dedication to the war earned him his first castle, Garantor. Now, Shadoe wasn't a governor, and wasn't sure what to do, so he just decided to give them a ton of grain and had them build some important buildings. He spent many weeks to ensure loyalty was brought back up, otherwise nothing gets built. Then built a workshop to increase the construction speed. Then focused on fairgrounds to ensure high loyalty. Once that was finished, Shadoe left the rest of the construction to the castle to finish on their own. Shadoe went and found a lovely lady, Nerida, and after some quick convincing, married her. However, as he was returning to his castle, the Northern Empire, Aserai, and Battania declared war on the Western Empire. Shadoe saw the biggest army he had ever seen from the Aserai, and it's laying siege to his castle. All that time and hard work to get that castle on the right track, gone. He knew there was nothing his tiny army could do. He retreated and gathered what soldiers he could and went to assist the Western Empire in taking the town of Saniopa. The Northern Empire made peace with the Western Empire. Word got to Shadoe about the Emperor trying to defend Ortesia again. Immediately, Shadoe moved his army there to assist. However, Emperor Gyarios only had about 800 troops to the Aserai's 1,100. They fought anyway, but Shadoe held his troops back. He wasn't about to walk into a slaughter. Another 500 troops arrived for Aserai, assuring their victory. 900 troops remained after defeating Gyarios' army, and as they chased after Shadoe, almost 1,000 Imperial reinforcements arrived, led by Archon apes. Better late than never, they were able to attack the army while it was divided and won the day. However, on this day, Shadoe made the decision to begin executing lords he took prisoner. He felt this war would never end so long as these lords remained in power. Without them, they can never again raise an army big enough to challenge the Empire. This was a very unpopular decision, but he didn't care. Shadoe knew it needed to be done if the world was to be united. Shadoe now turned his attention to the Batarians. They were trying to retake Remtoil Castle, but that was quickly dealt with. Awkwardly, Shadoe thought the army was on its way to siege the town of Marunath. He rode ahead and began setting up the siege camp, but watched as the army marched by, and because he was greatly outnumbered, the army sallied out. Shadoe had no choice but to leave some supplies and men behind just to get away. He quickly ran back to recruit back to full strength, while also ambushing some Batarian parties. The war continued back and forth, with Imperials taking Vernon Castle and giving it to Shadoe. He immediately went over and checked on its status and began plans to improving the quality of life there. Shadoe continued ambushing parties and executing the leaders. After taking heavy losses, Shadoe needed to recruit more troops. However, a messenger arrived and a vote for the new owner of the town of Varcheg was decided. 50% of the Imperial lords thought it should go to Shadoe. He now owned his first town, which was far to the north in the snowy lands of Sturgia. During this time, Azurai made peace with the Western Empire again. For now, the only war officially going on was with the Batarians. Even though Shadoe didn't care much for Vernon Castle, he still defended it in order to keep the territory they conquered. Shadoe finally got the chance to check out his new town and began building structures to help improve it. The tough part was getting loyalty up since it wasn't an imperial town. He waited for many weeks and even got word of Emperor Garios giving Shadoe 3 more castles: Lanark Hen, Abcomer, and Talavel. Shadoe went and looked to see if each castle was worth his time and dinars to invest in. They were deep in enemy territory and would be extremely difficult to defend. He did the best he could and ambushed parties wandering around. He went back to Varcheg, and while waiting for his projects to finish, the Batarians had enough and accepted their losses and sued for peace. Now that peace was established across the Western Empire, Shadoe could put all his focus into improving the lands he was granted. That was until 2 minutes later, the Northern Empire declared war on the Western Empire again. However, Shadoe did not act on it right away. The war was on the other side and did not threaten his lands, so he continued to work on his projects, waiting, and lots of waiting. Then the Azurai declared war once again, so Shadoe decided to begin recruiting troops. He knew about the great numbers the Azurai were capable of gathering, and once again, as he was leaving Ortesia, the Azurai set a new record of almost 1,700 troops. At that moment, the Batanians also declared war since this was their best chance at retaking the lands while the Empire was busy with 2 other wars. Shadoe could do nothing as his villages were getting raided and castles he cared little for were getting sieged. Since he had no support, he decided to return to Varcheg and gather his most experienced troops and tried taking the nearby castle of Flin Tolg. It had a tiny garrison, but while Shadoe was in the bathroom, an army twice as big as his arrived to stop him. He had no choice but to try and get away. That didn't stop him from attacking parties that were by themselves and executed the lords. He took out a lot of them, and began to wonder how many lords could they lose before they didn't have anyone left. Shadoe tried one more time to take Flin Tolg Castle. Even though he had twice as many troops as the garrison, an army of about 600 was approaching. He committed to taking the castle and took it. However, he wasn't able to get away in time and had to sacrifice a lot of troops just to escape. It took a while, but he was able to replenish his numbers. During this time, the war with the Northern Empire came to an end. This was good news since it meant Imperial troops would now get redirected towards the Azurai and Batanians. As Shadoe made his way back to the war front, he saw the town of Sianon was under garrisoned. He then learned how to call for Imperial lords to come to his aid and gather a large army to help him take the town. He laid siege to it as another Imperial army arrived to make it about 1,400 Imperial troops against just 400 Batanians. With such overwhelming numbers, Shadoe sent in troops to take it, even rescuing some Imperial lords being held captive there. Shadoe then voted for him to be the new owner. It was in a great location, near the war front, and still close to the Empire if he needed to recruit more troops. The economy of the town was also in great shape. He quickly got to work and started on the same projects for any town. The war with the Aserai came to an end during this time, and later on Shadoe executed the leader of the Battanians, which the new leader quickly requested peace. Once again, there was peace throughout the Empire. So Shadoe got to work on improving the lands he now owned. He did many quests for the people around Seanon, until Emperor Gyarios got tired of the peace and decided it was time for war again on the Northern Empire. It was his goal to unite the Empire. However, Shadoe stayed in his lands to continue bringing prosperity to his people. After many months, the war was over again, without any aid from Shadoe. Many more months passed, and Gyarios decided to conquer the remaining lands held by the Battanians. So war was declared again, but Shadoe did not come to aid right away. He finished up doing the quests he promised to complete, which was buying some cows for a merchant. Then he joined with the army to take the town of Dunglanes. It was the only town left owned by the Battanians, and it was easily taken over. Then war was declared by both the Northern and Southern Empires. However, Shadoe hunted down what was left of the Battanian army. They may not have any castles or towns, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try and take one back. He figured this was the best chance while the Battanian strength was at an all-time low. The Southern Empire realized their mistake and pretty quickly requested peace. With a pitiful force of 300, the Battanians tried to retake Flintog Castle, but an army was quickly dispatched to end the siege. It was hardly called a battle, more like a slaughter. Most of the troops weren't even Battanians, but mercenaries from places like the Aserai. You could say this was the end of the Battanians. They never became a real threat to the Empire ever again. Shadoe continued to check up on his lands, while also defending against raids from Battanian raiders. He looked east and saw the war with the Northern Empire was going very well. They were down to their last 2 towns and castles, until Gyarios overstepped and declared war on the Crusates. Still, Shadoe wanted the war with the Northern Empire to be over with, so he rode east to assist in taking the few remaining lands held by the Northern Empire. As he got close to the war front, war for the first time was declared by the Valandians. Shadoe headed back to defend his lands against this new force he had never faced. When he got to Vernon Castle, there was a large force of 1,400 troops sieging it. His other castles, Talivel, Abcomer, and Lenok Hen, were already taken by the Valandians. So Shadoe tried to go to the northern side of their kingdom and take what territory he could. During this time, the war ended with the Northern Empire. During the siege of Drumore Castle, Shadoe didn't see the reinforcements arrive. However, this was still an even-numbered fight. Even though Shadoe was technically outnumbered, he had confidence his troops were more experienced fighters. He went and positioned his troops on top of a hill. His archers rained arrows down on the enemy while his cavalry flanked from the sides. He had his footmen charge in. Shadoe even charged in himself to ensure victory. The battle looked bad. His footmen were retreating, and Shadoe's archers were now in melee. He tried to reform their positions for the next attack wave. More fighting ensued, until...
What? How in the world did he hit me? Come on.
Shadoe was knocked out in battle. It was now up to his troops. The battle was close. Both sides were about even. Eventually, Shadoe's party did overcome the odds and defeated the Valandian army, but at a heavy cost. Even though they won the battle, only 35 troops were still fit for battle. Shadoe had to abandon the siege and retreat to the town of Kar-Banseth. While recuperating, he had the 5 lords he took prisoner executed. After recovering from his wounds, he traveled around the Empire for new recruits and checked up on his towns and castles. The war finally ended with the Crusates, which means Gyarios will turn his army around and come assist in the west against the Valandians. However, the Battanians tried sieging Flintog again. Shadoe was able to get an army quickly and stop them. This was an important battle because Shadoe could see a lot of remaining lords of Battania were in this army. However, Lord Aritha attacked too early, and Shadoe wanted all the credit for defeating this hopefully last stand of the Battanian army. So he pulled his troops back and let Aritha's army get defeated. Once the battle was over, Shadoe moved in to finish the army off. Shadoe took part in this historic battle. Majority of the Battanians were either killed or taken prisoner. However, this turned out to be a distraction. The real Battanian army retook the town of Dunglanes. The Empire decided it was time for peace with the Valandians, for now. Shadoe took this opportunity to raise a massive army to retake Dunglanes. Shadoe personally sieged this castle and slaughtered so many men. There were a lot of Battanians fighting to keep the city, but they weren't strong enough against the might of the Imperial Legion. Shadoe returned to being a good lord again, checking up on his people and making sure all the projects were still being worked on. Flintog Castle was the hardest to keep loyal. He had to spend most of his time there to get anything built. However, if there's anything we've learned about Calradia is that peace never lasts. Gyarios, wanting to continue his plan to unite the Empire, declared war on the Southern Empire. Shadoe wanted to help this time on the Eastern Front. The sooner the Empire could unite, the better chance they would have against another war against one of the other kingdoms. During the war, the Northern Empire decided to also go to war against the Western Empire despite being so weak. Shadoe did what he does best, and gathered enough troops to take the town of Poros. He mastered the art of sieging, building up 4 trebuchets to rain artillery down on the city to make things easier. Despite taking the city, the Southern Empire responded with a strong army to retake it. Shadoe knew this was a big mistake on their part. Reinforcements were on the way, and even though they arrived too late, the town was taken. They were able to attack in time before they garrisoned the town. The southern troops were massacred, and the town was retaken easily. Shadoe then went around raiding southern villages and attacking any parties wandering around by themselves. He even spotted a southern army of 300 mostly made up of recruits. He quickly chased after them despite being outnumbered by an extra 100 men. Not to worry, Shadoe's men were elite troops at this point, and attacking a bigger army of recruits would still be an easy fight. It was like lambs to the slaughter. They held position in the river, but it was pointless. The cavalry charged right in. The Southern Empire couldn't quickly get an army together and try to defend its territory, not with Shadoe wandering through their land ambushing their parties. They continued on and took places like Mornia Castle and the town of Lycaron. They ambushed more of the southern armies, then took the town of Phycaon, before finally requesting peace. Then Shadoe turned his attention to the town of Argoron. He laid siege to it and was backed up by reinforcements. They easily took the town with 2,000 Imperials. They even took the leader, Arcor, prisoner, but Shadoe had him executed. Argoron was given to Shadoe after this victory, shortly followed by peace with the Northern Empire. Attention could now return to the Aserai. They still really wanted to take the town of Ortesia, but the Empire always arrived in time to lift the siege. It was a massive battle, but the Empire outnumbered the Aserai. Victory was assured. They then moved to retake Garantor Castle and Thraktore Castle. However, one of the towns in the Empire decided to rebel, so the army had to quickly turn around and retake it. During the siege, the Southern Empire declared war again. This was a big mistake since the main army was close by now. After retaking the town, the Western Empire immediately continued its campaign to unite the Empire, starting with Chenopsis Castle. However, a large Southern army was spotted on the move. It was met with an equal force. Shadoe then traveled deep into enemy territory and took Cyratos Castle. However, this was just a distraction to get the armies of the south to come stop him, while the main western forces took more castles. Shadoe would then attack any parties wandering alone and ambush them, followed by their execution, never to be a threat to the Western Empire again. Shadoe decided to try and raise a large army to take the coastal town of Vostrum. This will be key to having the Southern Empire surrounded from all sides. Shadoe could only muster about 750 soldiers to the garrison's 700. It would be a tough fight, but he spent enough time destroying their defenses and bringing down their walls. All that time spent clearing out the southern armies was worth it because no reinforcements arrived to help save the city. They stormed through the openings in their walls and slaughtered every soldier inside. After taking the city, Shadoe went scouting to the other castles and towns. However, Vostrum was taken back by the Southern Empire. Not to worry, as Shadoe rode back. He saw it was already under siege again, but even more surprising, he spotted the Emperor of the Southern Empire. Shadoe took him prisoner, and while waiting for the siege, a large force of 500 arrived. Shadoe rode out to meet this force with his 600 army. As he gave chase, another army of about 500 Southern Imperials were approaching. Shadoe was barely able to catch up with the first 500 without the worry of the second one able to assist. After defeating the first 500 men, the Southern Empire declared peace. Unfortunately, Vostrom was still owned by the Southern Empire at the time, so they get to keep it. For now. War with Stygia finally commenced for the first time in history. Shadoe quickly leapt into action and took Lochana Castle. Since they were still at war with the Northern Empire, he turned his attention to them and took Epinosa Castle. Then, to hammer a crushing blow to them, he sieged the town of Amprila. A lot of Northerners were inside, about 1,100 strong. Shadoe requested reinforcements, and once they arrived, he ordered the assault. It was another massive siege. Lots of killing happened. Unfortunately, Shadoe fell off the walls and broke his legs, so he had to rely on his army to win the battle. He took many prisoners and had them all executed. Shadoe even requested strongly to own the town. The best part was the town was fully built and didn't need any improvements. With a heavy loss like that, the Northern Empire begged for peace just to stay alive. He then returned home to fight on the Western Front again. He did his best and fought the armies in the open. However, the Valandians were very organized and tough to fight. Still, Shadoe was victorious. Shadoe and a large army of Imperials were able to defeat a large Valandian force near Marunath, and then take the town. Then quickly took Remtoil Castle as it was under-garrisoned. The Valandians knew they suffered enough and so quickly requested peace. Shadoe spent some time getting his lands back on track, especially Flynn Tog Castle. Progress was still very slow with them. While war with Stygia was still ongoing, all-out war was declared by almost everyone. The Northern and Southern Empires, the Azerai, and Valandian once again. Shadoe rode east to try and finish off the Northern Empire, but Seonon was under attack. He turned his army around and made his way back. Uthlium Castle was also under siege with an army of 600 Valandians. Reinforcements did arrive and they were able to save the castle. However, as they were making it to Seonon, the town was taken. But before they could garrison it, they were able to intercept them. A lot of Valandian lords were taken prisoner, but a lot of Imperial lives were also lost. It was enough to retake the town at least. All of the Valandian lords were executed for this. Shadoe spent some time in Seonon to make repairs and get loyalty back up. The Western Empire needed to make peace, however, with the Valandians. There were just too many wars going on. They also made peace with the Northern Empire, Stygia, and the Azerai. They continued fighting the Southern Empire. So Shadoe once again traveled to the other side of the world to wage war. He started with Epinosa Castle since it had barely any defenders, then began raiding villages. This would make it difficult for the remaining lords to raise an army since all the villages had no recruits in them. He also hunted down all the lords he came across. He took Epinosa Castle, defeated a large southern army, took the town of Myzia, once again forcing the Southern Empire to make peace. Of course, as one war ended, another one will usually spring up shortly after. Valandia wanted revenge. That's okay, because Shadoe wanted payback as well, especially since they took Seonon again and were attempting to take Flynn Tog Castle. Shadoe easily defeated them and executed their lords. This was getting personal. Valandians were attacking lands owned by Shadoe, and he was going to make them pay. He retook Seonon, then Remtol Castle, and Marunath. He looked at his map and knew this was just the beginning. There was a lot of land to conquer. He moved to take Pendriek Castle, Nevinask Castle, Kalias Castle, and Dremor Castle. Shadoe then scouted around and saw the Empire took a lot of castles and the town of Pencannock. He then took the towns of Car Panseth and Dunglanis, followed by Aster Castle. This was such a major loss for the Valandians, they had no choice but to request peace. Looking at the map, the Empire had made great progress and were getting even closer to eradicating the Valandians. Some rebellions popped up, but also the Southern Empire tried its luck again. During the Great War with 5 Kingdoms from earlier, it looks like they did retake a lot of territory. So Shadoe had a lot of work to do. First taking Goss Castle, Cestadium Castle, then war with the Valandians opened back up again. Quickly Shadoe headed back to try and cause problems for the Valandians. Then went to the northern part of the war front to take Ormanfard Castle. This would open up a path to take the northern lands of Valandia. This was his first goal, and he would accomplish it after many months. First it was Turby Castle, then the towns of Rovolt and Ostakon. Valandians fought barely to hold these lands, but Shadoe was a great general and knew what it took to take these lands. It was a long and costly campaign in the north. Of course, he continued where he left off and headed south. He began raiding the villages to make things difficult for the Valandians. Things were already hard for the Valandians since Azurai were also at war with them and taking a lot of their territory. With all of these raids, Valandia was having a hard time raising any kind of army. Eventually they requested peace, but this was only to delay the inevitable. Sturgia was next, and of course Shadoe took it upon himself to head north and take this long stretch of land from Sturgia. Ustakol Castle was first, but Sturgia took Amprila. So Shadoe headed there to retake that great city, but was met with a big force he could not defeat on his own. Reinforcements did arrive to turn the tide. The town was retaken and continued taking other castles like Urikskala Castle, Dinar Castle, and Kaysar Castle. Then rode all the way back to take Ustakol Castle before the peace agreement was signed. Then he rode over to fight the Azurai, who in the past you remember tried so many times to take the town of Ortesia. Well, the Azurai had finally taken the town. Gyarios would not stand for this, and quickly sent his army to retake it. However, an even bigger army arrived to stop the Emperor. The Azurai were known for their large armies, so Shadoe did what he does best and hunted down smaller parties and executed their lords in order to dwindle down their army over time. When war with Sturgia boiled over again, Shadoe took this opportunity in the north to keep taking territory near his lands. He took the town of Revel, then Omor, and during the siege for Balgard, the Valandians decided to declare war again. Shadoe quickly pushed to take the town, but a large Sturgian force was ready to retake it after they left. As Shadoe tried to cross the bridge, he was surrounded. How in the world could he get out of this? Wow, just barely squeezed through there. Shadoe recruited more troops as he made his way over to the war front with Valandia. He knew if he could end the Valandians forever, the war against other kingdoms would go a lot easier since they won't be surrounded anymore. He tried sieging Dunglanis, but a huge force of 1,400 Valandians were approaching. This was to draw them in to Gyarios' army of 1,200. It was another massive battle in the forest and many lives were lost. Shadoe even fell in battle, but the Empire was victorious. After recovering from his wounds, Shadoe pressed on to try and take Thraktora Castle, but 900 soldiers drove him off. He requested an army and began to siege the town of Oxhall. During the battle, Shadoe was shot in the ass and was knocked out, but the town was still taken, then moved to take Drapan Castle. Although a large force was ready to retake it, even Oxhall was retaken. The Valandians were not giving up on their central homelands. Once Shadoe had the forces he needed, he moved in to wipe out the large army of Valandia and execute their leaders. Now the tides have turned. Oxhall was taken, Prevend, Verisan Castle, and Hongard Castle right before another peace agreement. Finally, a big push against the Valandians was successful, and now they were down to their last few towns and castles. War with the Southern Empire rose up again, and Shadoe answered the call. He lifted the siege of Goth's Castle, then took Jogari's Castle, Melion Castle, and Cornea Castle, then laid siege to the town of Onira. It was another slaughter. Mostly recruits and militia guarded the town. Quickly it fell to the Western Empire, then moved on to the next town of Danus Tika. During the battle, Shadoe got stuck. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't stop falling. Still, his army was able to take the town. Shadoe moved to take the town of Faikanon once again. They easily took the town, then pressed on to Mornia Castle, and then Vostrom again. He needed a massive force since there was about 950 southern troops stationed there. At best, he could muster 850, but after some artillery strikes, the garrison inside lost almost half its troops, down to almost 500. With the advantage now on Shadoe's side, he commenced with the attack. The Southern Empire was now out of towns and only had a few castles left. However, the Crusates went to war with the Western Empire and took a few castles and towns from them. Shadoe went and pushed them back and retook Danus Tika. As Shadoe made his way to Oristokori's castle, Shadoe looked at his updated map and saw only the Western Empire. Both the Northern and Southern Empires held no more territory in Calradia. The Western Empire united the whole of the empire, and now dominated most of the known world. Shortly thereafter, Shadoe took the castle and ended the Southern Empire's rule. There might still be loyalists roaming the world, but for now, they were no longer a threat to the empire. With the war raging against Valandia, this was Shadoe's chance to also end this kingdom. He took Thraktore Castle, Usnak Castle, the towns of Charis, Jaculen, and Galend. Valandia quickly requested peace to save themselves from extinction, but they were only delaying Shadoe's attempt at wiping them out. Shadoe took his frustration out on the Aserai by taking the town of Sargot. Looking at the map, the Empire was at war with everyone in the north, east, and south of the map. Shadoe made his way over to try and stop the siege of Argoron, but with only 400 troops, he stood no chance against the army of 1,200. He called for reinforcements, and once they arrived, they were able to defeat them in a massive battle. He took many of their lords prisoner and had them executed. Shadoe felt the best way to deal with these wars is to start at the top. He went to the cold north and fought the Sturgians. Started with taking the town of Omor and Ov Castle, before the Valandians declared war again. Immediately, as fast as he could, he hurried over to the west and began attacking the Valandians. He requested what troops he could to assist in taking their last town of Prevend. With 1,100 troops, he began attacking it with artillery to bring their numbers down. Eventually, it was down to almost 1,000, but he only had about 800 troops. He was confident his troops were more experienced than the Valandian army had left. It's true, Shadoe only lost about 50 troops while the Valandians lost 600 and the other 400 surrendered. Shadoe then quickly took the remaining castles of Verisand and Hongard. With the Valandians scattered without a castle or town to take shelter or recruit more troops, Shadoe went on a manhunt to execute every remaining lord wandering around the lands. After many heads were chopped off, he felt the Valandians were no longer a threat and left to focus on the Sturgians once again. With his large army, Shadoe marched north and took the towns of Sibir and Varnova Pol. A large army of 600 Sturgians were on the move, but Shadoe was able to catch up with them and eliminate them. He moved on to take Valadiv Castle, and another army of 600. Next was the town of Tayal, but annoyingly they retook Valadiv Castle, so Shadoe had to retake it again, then continued taking Uruk Skala Castle, and lifted the siege of Tayal. The Sturgians were trying their best to retake their land, but Shadoe was not making it easy for them. Next was Dinar Castle, the town of Baltak Hand, Khazar Castle, Epinosa Castle, Lochana Castle, and the town of Amprila. During the siege, the last of the Sturgian army assembled outside for a final stand against Shadoe. He was outnumbered and tried to run, but at that moment all the lords from inside the town rode out to surround Shadoe. Shadoe's army of about 900 would have to beat the last of the Sturgians of 1,500 troops. I know it's a bit anticlimactic to simulate this battle, but Shadoe did win. He took so many lords prisoner and had them promptly executed, then took the town of Amprila. Sadly, Shadoe was not offered this town. He continued helping defend the north from what remained of the Sturgians until they declared peace after such a loss. He then pressed forward into Kruzate's land, starting with the town of Makeb, Khazar Castle, and the town of Baltak Hand again. But then Shadoe noticed the Aserai were taking lands this far north, so he began retaking them and pushing the Aserai back to the desert lands. However, the peace with Sturgia did not last long, and Shadoe went right back to taking what was left of them, Tepi's Castle and Usek Castle, but then the Kruzates declared war again, which was perfect timing because Shadoe kept pressing forward and take the town of Orton Guard and Kimli Castle. Looking at the map, not only does the Empire control so much territory, but the northern and southern empires have returned and took some territory. As Shadoe traveled to retake Diathma, word spread that the Sturgians also retook some towns in the north. With so much territory, it was becoming impossible to hold it all. Shadoe pressed on and retook the town, spreading the Northern Empire armies away. He hunted down the ones he could find and then executed them, in hopes they would never return again. Same with Valandia. They had taken a small castle. Shadoe took many prisoners in a battle, including the king. Shadoe then tried to hunt down as many lords in the area as he could. Every time he killed the next ruler, another one would be crowned. Shadoe knew he had to hunt down the entire family if he wanted to eliminate the entire kingdom. He took the castle and began investigating the leader's whereabouts. While retaking Prevend, the queen retook the same castle, but Shadoe was there to stop her and execute her. During a search for the next queen, the Southern Empire declared war, so Shadoe did the same tactic on them, systematically eliminating every lord and try to hunt down each new emperor. Shadoe even traveled deep into Azerai land to take the one town the Valandians held, just to go after their next queen. Finally, after so many wars with the Valandians, Shadoe executed the last queen of the Kingdom of Valandia. They were now officially no more. From here, Shadoe decided to focus his attention on every leader of the small kingdoms. He then focused on the Battanians, who haven't been relevant in a long time, but it is still possible for them to be a threat. However, the king ruler was said to be at the town of Iakis, but checking the prison, he was not there. I'm not sure if this is a bug or a glitch. Shadoe then went and hunted down the Northern Empire emperor. He had to take the town of Diath Ma to kill the empress, then found the next one riding around in the middle of the empire. The next one was at Myzia, but once again wasn't in prison. Shadoe then tried looking for Emperor Gyarios, and turns out Emperor Gyarios had him as a prisoner. So he was able to barter with him and then executed the Northern Emperor. The next one was also running freely around the empire. Same with the next one. The next empress was said to be at Quayaz, so Shadoe heads over there, but she's not there. Now she's somehow at Diath Ma, so Shadoe heads over there, but nope. She's at Danustika. Shadoe feels like he's on a wild goose chase when suddenly, in the corner of his eye, he spots her. Really, game? Are you just making up where NPCs are now? Anyway, after a long chase, Shadoe was able to corner her and finally get her. With her execution, it finally was the end of the Northern Empire. While Shadoe was busy hunting down the remaining rulers, Emperor Gyarios and the Imperial Legion seemed to be doing a great job retaking all the towns and castles. Shadoe decides to help by taking the rest of the desert south, starting with Medini Castle, the town of Hubyar, Sahel Castle, the town of Razi, Temne Castle, Shibal Zoom Castle, and the town of Dan Ustika. All fell to the might of Shadoe and the Imperial Legion. Only a handful of towns and castles remained. Shadoe continued his campaign with taking the towns of Chaikan, Ortungard, Hukkun Castle, the town of Akalat, and finally Simira Castle. With that, the Empire had finally conquered the last piece of land owned by another kingdom. The Empire was successful in uniting the world of Calradia under one kingdom. Shadoe tried hunting down the leaders of the still remaining kingdoms, but they went into hiding, or were stuck in prison and Shadoe wasn't able to barter for them because of some strange bugs or glitches. Since they never seemed to be a threat, Shadoe finally accepted this was truly the end. He brought peace, freedom, and justice to the Empire. He could now go back and rule over his lands and live out the rest of his days peacefully. In conclusion, Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord is still a great sandbox game. As you probably felt, it can get pretty grindy and a lot of back and forth, but at least for me, I still love this gameplay loop. It never got boring for me, but more importantly, I did feel like I was always progressing. Even if later on we had some setbacks or I needed to retake the same towns or castles, but usually I ended up taking new territory. As long as I picked a goal and stuck through it, it eventually, after many hours, became possible to obtain. The level of progression always had me feeling great. I'll be honest, there were times I wanted to call it quits and just say, Shadoe conquered the world.
End of story. Goodbye, the end.
But that would have been very lazy and is the reason I did my best to stick with it and show you I did eventually do it. I also hope I was able to keep your attention, so if you stuck around, then thank you, and I hope you enjoyed Shadoe's story. This was completely made up and a summary of what happened in my playthrough. I did try my best to add some emotional value and motivation, but again, that was all just made up, and I hope it came out alright. Even now, as I write this script, I did start playing a brand new sandbox with some mods to improve the experience. I would caution you because I had the game crash quite a bit, so just try a couple of mods at a time to make sure you have a smooth experience. So definitely buy this game on Steam or consoles for a great sandbox experience. I highly recommend it. I've noticed in the past year we've seen a return of dragons in our culture, like House of the Dragon, Wild Dragonflight, and even this new movie Shazam 2 features a dragon. So next month we'll have something to do with dragons. Hope to see you there. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe to help grow my channel, and comment below on what you thought. Also check out my other videos, and check me out on Spotify. I'm part of the Time Pals podcast, and this month I talked about Magic the Gathering scandals. Check the link in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.